Good afternoon, all the participants of this national workshop on behavioral methods, research methodology in behavioral sciences. It is my pleasure indeed to welcome Dr. Surabhi Kumar as a resource person on the ninth day of this workshop. Dr. Surabhi Kumar is an assistant professor in psychology at Indraprastha College for Women with PhD in psychology from University of Delhi. She has specializes in applied social psychology, developmental psychology, and research methods. She has been engaged as a resource person with SOS Children's Village projects in areas of character building, alternate disciplining methods, emotional well-being, social skills, and positive youth development. She has also served as a guest editor for a special issue of the Indian Journal of Social Health and Well-being. She has to her credit numerous national and international publications and presentations and has supervised multiple research projects. Ma'am, on behalf of organizing team of Arya Mahila PG College and Rajghat College, the Santa College for Women Rajghat, I welcome you once again. So, ma'am, over to you. We
Okay.
are delighted to have you and with your wonderful talk. Thank you, ma'am.
All right. Right. So just confirming I'm audible
Yes.
and yeah. All right. So it's a pleasure to be here. I am glad that I'm addressing a group of students that I have never met. Even I've never visited Banaras, so that's also a novelty factor that is there for me. I'm thankful to Richa for having invited me and Dr. Pagya for recommending me in the process. Right. So we will be doing something which sort of becomes problematic for most students, and as I understand that most students here are PG students, so there is some encounter or the other where you have to do report writing, and then there are new editions of APA that keep changing. Right, so we'll start with some basics about it, and then I'll focus on the main ideas. I will try and also do some exercises that you get a hands-on experience about how to go about the APA format. Right. So before I start today, excuse me a second. Right. Can somebody tell me why do you think we need the APA format? If someone can tell me, why
Ma'am,
do you think?
to
Yes, please.
maintain uniformity, because if everyone writes report differently, then that will look very awkward and very chaotic.
But don't in psychology we talk about appreciating individual differences? What do you
Yes,
think about
ma'am, we
that?
do, but ma'am, there should be a proper format for writing report and research papers. Individual differences can be in the analysis part and how we analyze the data and everything, but then the report has to be uniform.
Yes, very well. Yes, right. So some light there. If someone else wants to add, you're most welcome to. Is there something that
Ma'am, to maintain some of the standards.
Okay, yes, some of the standards, right? So if you historically look at where the publication manual does come in, we have the first manual that comes in 1929. There was a 7-page article that said standard of procedure, which is the word that you just used, to which exceptions would doubtless be necessary and hence the individual differences, but to which reference may be made in case of doubt. Right. So in many ways, this is the most commonly used format in manuscripts in social sciences. It's not only if you're a psychology scholar that you would possibly encounter APA. In most social sciences, that's the go-to way. Also, in recent times, with accreditation bodies like NAC coming in, the idea to standardize is becoming extremely important, and hence even you're expected to say, if you're citing a journal on your CV, an article on your CV, you're expected to follow the APA format. Right, so it does then provide a foundation for effective scholarly communication. It helps authors present their ideas in a clear, concise, and organized manner. So it is regulating stylists, it's in-text citations, and referencing. So I'll try and take you through most of these. So in a sense, if you are able to ensure uniformity and consistency, there is a focus on the idea, right? So the moment I can say that this is how it should look, there is no problem in the way it should look, there is a clear focus that comes on the idea, and you could possibly scan the work for key points, findings, and sources. So if any of you have ever undertaken an exercise of writing a literature review, you would realize that just when you're reading the article, sometimes it becomes difficult to find where is what. What does the author want to say? Where is the method? Where is the result? Where is the conclusion? APA format in many ways allows us to get that uniformity and consistency, and we could possibly then focus on the same, right? So you are one also at the same time encouraging authors to disclose essential information, and that is something that is important, particularly in order to ensure ethical work practices, right? So as the style works best, ideas flow logically, sources are credited appropriately, and papers are organized in predictable manners, and that would be something that would help the reader as well as the writer, right? You are describing people in languages that affirm their worth and dignity. So there has been very recently, APA has come out with another addendum where they've spoken about what is inclusive language. How do you say refer to a person of color? How do you refer to linguistic differences? How would you refer to religious differences, etc., which particularly for a country like ours is something which is very relevant to be able to know what would be the right ways that would be that should be used such that we can refer to our participants, right? And there is an entire way where we could look at ethical compliance as well as be able to report critical details, right? And so if you go to the APA manual, you'd notice that they talk about journal article reporting standards, and these are some of the reasons that they mention. And there is an entire website that's dedicated by APA to talk about the ethic of transparency, how when you're say publishing a paper, the entire process of how do you allow reviewers and editors evaluate manuscripts for their scientific value and not for their stylistic value, right? So there is an endeavor at the end of the day to be able to improve the quality of published work, and that's where we are aiming at. This entire workshop, I think, in many ways is attempted at training future researchers to improve the quality and at the same time ensure that quality of work is ensured, right? So let's look at some very basic considerations. The first thing that one needs to look at is the fact that the point of view. In APA format, something that they hold very dearly is that you use first person pronouns rather than report things in third person, which is slightly different from what you might have been trained previously in school, where you are encouraged to use third person pronouns. But APA would suggest that saying we conducted an experiment is the right way to go, while the authors conducted an experiment, which is a third person account, is not the way to go. Another thing would be about voice, right? Which is that there has to be active voice when you're stressing the actions of the research, and passive voice when you're stressing the recipient or the object of action. So say, for instance, we asked the participant questions is the better statement in comparison to participants have been asked questions by the researchers. So taking an active voice about the actions that you have taken is the right way to go, and passive voice the when you're stressing the actions of the object, right? So the tests were inconclusive over, we found the tests inconclusive. Right. Um, is someone saying something? I guess not. Right. The next would be about language, right? So how do we ensure that language is clear, concise, and plain? So much like I think all of us in our journeys of being students have spent a lot of time filling the pages, in the sense that we want to write longer sentences and longer assignments in the hope that the teacher would get impressed or this would carry more merit. APA tells you that be specific in your descriptions, be condense the information wherever possible, and use simple language and minimize figurative language. You're not writing a story in fiction, but you're reporting research. And that becomes something that is, you're retraining your mind to believe that good work can also be simple work, right? So let's do a small exercise. I would invite you all to try and answer. You could use the chat, or you could just um, unmute yourselves and share. When I'm saying concise, right? So you can replace several vague words with more powerful specific words. You should interrogate every word in a sentence and try and combine sentences. So I have a few sentences here, and I'd want you to try making it concise. So this is the first sentence. The politician talked about several of the merits of after-school programs in his speech. It's 14 words. Can somebody make an attempt to make it shorter?
Ma'am, the politician talked about the pros of after school programs in the speech.
Could you please repeat?
The politician
Okay.
talked about the pros of after school programs.
Okay. How many words have you reduced? You've
Not
removed
much.
several of the merits. 4 words. 3 words you've removed. Okay. Anyone else who wants to give it a try?
Politician pointed the several merits of after school program.
Okay. All right. You've removed in his speech and you've removed. Okay. Right. So I think somebody's requested on the chat that I should use Hindi also. I will try to explain in Hindi, but many of the examples that I will give will be in English. Please. Okay. In the speech, politician addressed the merits of the program. Okay. Let's see. So I'm proposing that we go down to 8 words. The politician touted after school programs in his speech. So I've removed 6 words and make it concise. Let's try another one. Our website has made available many of the things you can use for making a decision on the best dentist. This is easier, I think. You can try. How about this one?
Ma'am, our website helps you decide the best dentist.
Very good. That will work. Yes. Okay. Right. So our website presents. Yes, please.
Best
Yes.
dentist can be decided by going to the website.
Okay. What's wrong with that sentence? You've used passive voice here. अभी मैंने बोला था कि एक्टिव वॉइस हम प्रेफर करेंगे. So that is one. Yes, please.
Our website has made for making a decision on the best dentist.
Okay. Right. The website has a checklist of best dentist. Yes. All right. Yes. Right. So our website presents criteria for determining the best dentist. It's the first sentence that I gave you was very wordy. इतना लंबा sentence बोलने की कोई जरूरत नहीं है. Small words. After all, and as you would go ahead in your careers as researchers, one thing that you'll realize is that you only get 6,000 words in a journal to publish, and you have to give everything. So how do you make it concise is something that you'll have to learn as we go along. Okay, how about this one? You could either replace vague words, you could interrogate every word in a sentence and combine sentences? How about combining sentences in this one?
The three Ludwig castles are a symbol of astounding marriage of beauty and madness.
All right. That makes it concise. Yes. All right. Okay. Yeah. Very well. Right. So let's. So I just wanted to illustrate a few, and we'll go from here. Right. So if once in the purview of research and the type of research that APA can be applied to, you have quantitative articles, you have qualitative articles, you have mixed method articles, you have replication articles, you have a qualitative analysis, meta-analyses, which is also known as a meta-synthesis, a quantitative meta-analysis, a literature review article, theoretical articles, methodological articles, many other types of articles, and of course, the one that you are most likely to do of student papers, dissertations, and theses that you get a chance to write your own work. APA then allows you to format for and provide stylistics for. It also gives you a clear idea about what is expected at each level. Right. So this is something that we are coming. We'll discuss more in detail that how do we go about then writing a report according to the APA format. Right. So let's look at a quantitative article. So a quantitative article, which you must know already, is something which is using empirical numerical information analyzed through statistical means, and it then you are looking at a problem which can be studied for that. So in an article then that you're writing, you have to include a title page, an abstract, an introduction, a method, a results section, a discussion, and the references section, right? So this is something that that we have to do. Another kind of article that you do come across are qualitative articles. And in qualitative research, you are attempting to learn more about human experiences that cannot be numerically quantified. So say, for instance, I'm doing a research to understand what is the experience of transiting from online classrooms into offline classrooms. I want to understand the first person accounts of what happened with the student who had, say, started their master's in psychology in an online mode, and what happened when they came back to an offline mode. What kind of experiences have changed for them? Or alternatively, I'm interested in understanding that how are adolescents, which is a difficult age to begin with, are coping with this kabhi online, kabhi offline mode, right? How are they making sense of it? I want to understand that. I will do a qualitative research, right? In a qualitative research, much similar to a quantitative research, we have a title page, an abstract, an introduction, a method, findings or results, a discussion, and references, right? The method and the results section in a quantitative and a qualitative research would be largely vary, but we'll discuss some of those things as we go ahead. And say, for instance, I want to write a review of literature, which is something that you might be doing as routine practice. How do you then work around it? So you summarize the scientific literature on a particular research topic. There is no clear specific order, but a good literature review then includes an introduction, a thesis statement, being able to summarize and synthesize your sources, and a list of references, right? So can you tell me what would be a good literature review topic? Can somebody tell me what would be, maybe somebody can tell, I gave you an example for qualitative research. Can someone give me an example for a quantitative research and one for a literature review?
Ma'am, for the literature
Yes.
review,
Yes, please.
the effect of vaccines on COVID recovered patients' mental health.
Okay. effective vaccines on COVID recovery. Okay, all right.
Ma'am,
For
Hanji.
quantitative, ma'am, we can see where we use scales. We just focus on the numbers over there, right? So that can be
Yes.
any study which involves using of scales can be an example of quantitative.
Riddhi, can you tell me what would you want to study?
Okay. So for example, if I am studying, say the level of depression, and if I use Beck's test for
Okay.
Beck's inventory for depression,
Yes.
so the
Okay.
answer which I'll get to, answers which I'll get, the response which I'll get will be in numbers, which
Yeah.
I'll have to show using the graphs or no, not the graphs. Graphs. Okay. Okay. I'm sort of confused over here. But
Okay. Say, for instance,
will
you've
be there.
administered the best Beck's inventory to a group of female students studying at an undergrad college
Okay.
in Banaras, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, say a quantitative research would then be that you are looking at, say, a larger sample. It's not a one person case study that you're doing,
Mm-hmm.
but you're looking at a sample of, say, 100 people, right? And then you are making some kind of hypotheses about what are you expecting, what is it that you need to study, and so on, right? You have to have a plan. In it can't be that you had this scale and you went on to study it, but you are looking at depression scores in a particular sample for some rationale. You'll have to plan that out when you go about doing research, right, Riddhi? We'll come back to an example a little later. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. I'll think
What
of an
are
example then.
Yes. Synthesis of sources basically means, Sucheta, that we are looking at. So, say for instance, I want to do this study on what is the experience, interactions among school going students post the pandemic. Right. So, I look at the research that is available, the data that is available in literature, papers that have been written on this, and I first make, say, maybe one section of my paper could be about what are peer interactions in school going children, and then I make one understanding, or I talk about how is it that this particular uh, and try and synthesize and present from literature. So, say for instance, author XYZ reported this in a sample of so on. I'm bringing that out, and then I'm drawing some kind of conclusions based on those studies in a literature review, right? That would be what I mean by synthesis of resources. Khushi is saying quantitative effect of mobile phone usage on student learning. Yes, why not? Yes. Uh, you could do that. Effect of lockdown or anxiety level of an extrovert adolescent. All right. Yes. You may have to also use a scale to measure extroversion, introversion, but yes, that can be done. Right. All right. Are we on the same page? Do I need to slow down? Is my pace fine? Do you need me to repeat something at this moment?
Ma'am, if you could go a little slow, that will be helpful.
Okay, I can go a little slower. Yes, I can. Okay. Right. So broadly speaking, then, APA format should be your essay then, or your research paper should be typed, should be double spaced, have 1-inch margins. You can use 10 to 12 point standard font. Times New Roman is one such example, and it needs to be printed on a standard size paper, a A4 size paper. My favorite is Times New Roman, as you can clearly see from my presentation, but the new APA format, that is the 7th one, actually allows you to use other formats also, where there is clarity, and you can pick your poison in that sense, right? So in an APA format, then every page of your research paper or your essay should include a page number in the upper right. If it's a professional paper, a page header is expected, which is in all caps in the upper left-hand corner. And student papers, like the ones that say you hand into your professors in college, say you've written an essay paper and you want to hand that in, or an assignment that you need to hand that in, they do not require running heads. What do I mean by a running head? So if you can see the screen, there is an example of an awesome example of an APA paper. This is a running head, and this is the page number that you need to insert. So a research paper then should include 4 major sections: a title page, an abstract, the main body, and the references. This remains constant irrespective of whether it is a quantitative paper, a qualitative paper, a literature review, a mixed method paper. All that said and done, a good, complete paper would then include all of these sections, right? So if you can look at this example, the page, there is a title. So the title of this paper here is Branching Paths, a novel teacher evaluation model for faculty development. Right, so this is the title page. If you can see the entire page, that's the title page. And this is the title of the paper. The page header I have written is a novel teacher evaluation model. Right, common practice is to use the keywords or the short form of the title in capital letters, and there's a page number to your extreme right. And then comes the way that you write the the author's names. So here the author names are Kim A. Park, James Davis, and so on. Then you mention the affiliation of the person, no title, no degree. You don't mention that. So it's not Dr. Surabhi Kumar. It should be just my name, Surabhi Kumar. And then no title, no degree. And you mention the affiliation, and that becomes very important here. Right. So on the title page, then here I mentioned Department of English and where the 2 authors or the 3 authors are coming from. It is possible that, say, you collaborate between the 2 colleges. Arya Mahila, I think, is one college, and Vasant College is the other one. Say, for instance, your teachers collaborate on a paper, they would mention that they come from, say, the Department of Psychology, but from different universities. So that number that there is would then refer to that, right? So this is how the title page seems to look. And then there is an author note. The author note contains on separate lines links to an ORCID ID, any affiliation changes, any disclosures, any acknowledgements, and also the contact information of a corresponding author. And you can omit any of the items that are irrelevant. So an ORCID ID then is something that I think all of us should have, and that's why I brought this here too. Is basically, think of it as a repository of all your research. So if once you are done with this session, maybe you can go and get yourself an ORCID ID and put your research papers there. Right. So you mentioned, say, for instance, I want to acknowledge the university that I work in, or I want to acknowledge the students who consented to be my participants, or I want to acknowledge maybe a funding agency that gave me the funds, etc. I mention that here. Right? This becomes of the author note. Then comes the next one, which is the abstract. Right? So the page header continues on all papers. Where you talk about a novel teacher evaluation model continues. There's a page number that changes. And then student papers, however, only contain the page number. You don't need to put a running head, right? Then comes the abstract, which is centered and bolded at the top of the page. An abstract then is something where you're writing 150 to 250 word summary of your paper in an accurate as well as a concise manner. And then you have towards the end in italics the word keywords, and you are following it with a short list of keywords. Think of keywords as the words that would help the search engine find your paper. So say, for instance, you've done a paper as somebody had mentioned on you want to do something on extroversion and anxiety, and the effect of lockdown. Then extroversion, anxiety, effect of lockdown, and say adolescence could be your keywords. These would be the keywords that are going to help the search engine find your paper, right? So this becomes of the abstract, right? Can somebody tell me what all should be included in an abstract? Any idea about what all?
Ma'am, the objective, the introduction part in a very, very short sentence, the methodology, the sample, and uh, I'm not sure about the result, whether we mention it or not, like the findings
Okay.
of the research
Okay,
and the
Shivja.
conclusion.
All right.
Ma'am, I think it is entire crux of the research that has to be mentioned in I mean, in a very small portion, or like it should explain everything, but it should be very brief. So I think this is what abstract is all about.
Okay. When do you write an abstract?
Ma'am, it should be 100 to 150 words.
Okay.
Ma'am, at
Ma'am,
the
it
end of the research.
means
End of the research. When do you
Abstract
usually
is
write
in
an
the
abstract?
beginning
Yes.
of the research, while I mean, you before
ma-
you start explaining about the research, it should be in the beginning, like right before anything else.
Yes, yes. But where do you write? When do you write it? I had asked.
Ma'am, we write it when we are publishing a paper so that the readers can understand whether they have to read through the study or not, whether it's something that they want to read, and whether that will help them in any way or not.
Very well.
ma'am,
Yes.
it is overall idea of a study
Anji.
which an individual done, and ma'am, basically it contains introduction, body, and conclusion.
Okay. Right. Okay. Most of you are bang on. I'll just detail it a little bit for you. Right. So the abstract is basically a glimpse into your paper. It tells me whether I should spend my time reading your paper or not. It sort of also allows me to make a call that, okay, this paper, should I make the effort of finding the full paper? Will this add value, or is this completely off topic? They're looking at something completely other than what I wanted to look at in my research. Right. So, an abstract generally then is your first thing that a reader reads in your paper. Also, as a researcher or as a student, whenever you're going about, say, doing a literature review, it's a good idea to first read the abstract before you decide कि अच्छा ये वाला paper मैं save करने लगी हूँ पढ़ने के लिए. Otherwise, that entire exercise becomes futile if you have not read through the abstract, right? So, but an abstract then is written as a researcher. When I complete my study, that's when I write an abstract, because then I'm in a position to document well that what was the objective, how did I go about doing my study, what are my findings, and what are the conclusions, as well as the broader implications of this research paper, right? However, when I'm reviewing something, that's my first thing to read. As a researcher, this is the last thing I write, right? So that's the distinction that I wanted to highlight, right? So if you're looking at, say, an abstract for an empirical article, it would include the problem under investigation in one sentence. You present the main hypotheses, the questions, or the theory under investigation. Then you mention the participants, right? So you specify pertinent characteristics, the participants. You don't have to mention all of these participants were studied and who are these participants. The greater detail will follow in the paper. Here you're mentioning that, say, 100 participants, 100 female participants belonging to X area of X age were, say, surveyed, and so on. Then you talk about the essential features of the study method in terms of the research design, whether you did an experimental study, an observational study, a qualitative study, a mixed method study. You talk about the analytic strategy that you've used. Have you used, if it's an experimental study, how have you gone about analyzing your data? If it's a qualitative study, how have you gone about analyzing the data? The analytical strategy would, of course, depend upon the research design in your goals. Then what was the data gathering procedure? How did you go about collecting the data? What was your sample size? What were the number of participants under study? You talk about the materials or the measures that you used in terms of the tools, and you also make a, if it's a secondary data analysis, that you mention the same there, right? So while you're writing an abstract, then you have to report this. Then comes basic findings. So you mention wherever there is a possibility to mention the effect sizes, confidence intervals, etc. If it's a quantitative analysis, qualitative methods, mention the main findings in relation to the central contextual features. And finally, you talk about the conclusions or the implications of or the applications of the research findings. All of this has to be done in 100 to 250, 150 to 250 words. Some journals may want 200 words, some journals may permit up to 250, and so on. Most conferences that you would go to would require an abstract between 200 to 250 words, right? Again, the task is, how do you then make it concise? How do you convey everything and yet keep it concise about what is it that you've done in your research, and such that the reader understands it, doesn't know too much because he still should read your paper, but knows enough to be interested and have the sense that this is a clear piece of writing that I want to invest my time and energy in. Right. So this becomes, how do we go about writing an abstract? Right. Any questions at this moment on how to write an abstract? All right. Very well. Right. Then going ahead, you are continuing. You first number the first page as number 3. Abstract was number 2. Now you, each level, you are center and bold the title on the top of the page. You type the text. You follow the heading levels. You should know what to report in each section, and we'll discuss some of that as we go ahead. Identify the sources that you have used in the paper in either narrative, citations, or parenthetical, and format the tables and the figures. And then comes the big task, which is to write the reference list, which will come in a bit. Right. So the APA uses a 5-level heading, and this is taken from the manual directly. So the first level is the level which is center, bold, title case headings, and the text begins from a new paragraph. The next is the level under it is a left, bold, title case heading. Then again, under which, if you're writing something, then it is a flush left, bold, italic, title case heading. Then you indent it and end it with a period. And this is italics indented and but ends with a period. Right. So here, the basic levels, this is something that is very central to the APA format. How do we go about leveling it? I'll give you a few examples such that it's clearer. So say for instance, I'm writing the methods section. Method, so method is the level 1, that's why it's center and bold. Then there is measures, which is level 2. Level 3, under measures, I have exercise. Under exercise, I have group exercise. And that becomes my level 4 heading. Then comes yoga class, which is my level 5 heading. So is spin class, which is again a level 5 heading. Then you have individual exercise, yoga at home, individual cycling, which level 4, level 5. I go back to level 3. So exercise and mood are at the same level. Then there is change in mood. There's increased mood, decreased mood. Then there is results at again level 1, and group exercise and increased mood at level 2. Right, so this is how it looks. Another example for you is this. So the paper title here is Age and Gender Differences in Self-Esteem. The level 1 heading, level 2 headings after introduction are here: gender and age differences, cross-cultural differences. These are your headings in the introduction. Then comes the method, which is again a level 1 heading. You have participants, measures. This is a level 3 heading. You are measuring self-esteem. Under self-esteem, you're also looking at socioeconomic indicators. You're also looking at gross domestic product per capita, or you're looking at human development index under it. So this is a level 4 heading, and then this becomes a level 5 heading. Right, so this is how it looks like. Then we have results again, which is a level 1 heading, and then we have discussion, which is again a level 1 heading. So broadly speaking, this level, the heading system, the 5-level heading system, helps me delineate which are the sections and under what section are you writing something, right? So common practice that we use is that I say, for instance, I want to write a paper or I want to write something. I usually use bullets and then I use nested bullets. Right, in APA, we don't use bullet points. Instead, we have these level headings that allow us to say what comes under what and how do we want to go about mentioning it. So say, for instance, let's come back again to this particular heading, which is exercise. So under exercise, I'm talking about two kinds of exercise, group exercise and individual exercise. And under group exercise, I'm talking about a yoga class and a spin class. And hence it's a different level. Under individual exercise, I'm talking about yoga at home and individual cycling, which is again a different level. Right, so instead of using nested bullets, we are using levels to help us understand this better. Right, so moving ahead, any questions on the level 5-level heading system? Okay, right.
No, ma'am.
Then comes the introduction. An introduction is something that you have to write, where you're basically doing three main things, right? In the introduction, one, you're framing the importance of the problem, right? So why is it that I want to study this? What are the psychological theories? What are the potential applications, therapeutic uses? What is the input for public policy, and so on? You are at this level mentioning that why is it that why do I want to study this? It could be, of course, I want to study this because it makes sense to me to study it, or it's my researcher's curiosity. I could do that like that too. But what does it mean at the larger level? This kind of framing also helps me to ensure that the reader knows that what is it that this report will include and will not include. अगर मैं आपको सिर्फ एक ही वेरिएबल देती हूँ, से मैं बोलती हूँ आपको पैंडेमिक के बारे में पढ़ना है. Say, for instance, that's the context. I say that what has been the psychological effect of the pandemic or psychological effect of lockdown. All of you possibly can design different kinds of studies in the same theme. Right? Somebody may want to study depression, somebody may want to study anxiety, somebody may say that I want to study how family bonding has enhanced because lockdown tha. Somebody may say some students may say that okay, हमें मौका मिला अब घर पे बहुत समय के बाद रहने का, हमने कुछ नया सीखा बनाने को, एक्सेट्रा एक्सेट्रा. हर इंसान डिफरेंटली उसको स्टडी कर सकता है कि क्या रहा साइकोलॉजिकल इफेक्ट पैंडेमिक का, राइट? उस हिसाब से इंट्रोडक्शन वो एक ऐसी जगह है जहां पे आपको अब पता चलेगा कि क्या पढ़ा जा रहा है. एंड as a reader, then I know that these are how you are framing your problem. This is how you're looking at the psychological effect of the pandemic. This is the place that makes that clear. Then comes what are the historical antecedents. When I say historical antecedents, I'm basically saying that you're presenting a review of the literature such that the reader knows that what is it that you are trying to study, what is the scope of the problem, what is its context, what is the theoretical implication of it, what is the practical implication of it, right? So some parts of the study, so it may be so that maybe I'm trying to study the experience of isolation during a lockdown. Okay, as a researcher, this is what I wanted to study. In this attempt to study isolation or say loneliness, I will go back to literature to see how has loneliness or isolation previously been studied, right? Not in only the context of a pandemic, but generally has been studied. I will, as a researcher, then also report that this has been done and this has been not done, right? So, what are the key issues that have emerged? What are the debates? Where are the potential barriers in knowledge? What are the knowledge gaps? What are the practical needs? And so on. It could be so at the same time that I'm thinking about studying isolation or the experience of loneliness in the pandemic. There are other researchers who've published on the same, which is great. I should report recent research too. I also report their work and I critically try and understand what is it that they've done and how is my study now going to be similar or is it going to be different from what has been accomplished in the field. I, in the introduction, make an attempt to then talk about that, okay, make a report. ये हुआ, ये हुआ, ये हुआ, ये हुआ, पर ये सब नहीं हुआ. अब ये सब नहीं हुआ, बहुत ब्रॉड चीजें हैं जो नहीं हुई. हाउ डू आई देन मेक सेंस ऑफ, ठीक है, बट मैं अपनी स्टडी में ये पढ़ूंगी. अब ऐसा नहीं है कि मैं सब कुछ पढ़ सकती हूँ, अभी भी पॉसिबल नहीं है कि मैं सब कुछ कर सकती हूँ. इंट्रोडक्शन में hence I am articulating also the study goals, right? What are the aims, the objectives of the study, and you make explicit the rationale for the design of your study. That how do you want to go about it? Will you then measure loneliness using a scale on loneliness, or would you prefer to do an interview with people who experience loneliness, or do you want to understand, or do you use both, that you want to use some method of a quantitative study and complement it with a qualitative interview and so on, or do you just want to do a literature review talking about the same, right? So somewhere here in the introduction you are also articulating the way that you should study, what is your rationale of the study, and what all will you cover, what are your aims, what are your objectives, and what are the goals of your study, right? An introduction then, if you think about a 6,000 page, 6,000 word article, an introduction only takes up about 1,000 words, right? So that's, so because we're focusing more on the number of what you are reporting, that's more important. But here 1,000 to 500, 1,500 is the larger, is how introduction has to be designed. Again, the task is to remain concise, report in active voice, and not be wordy unnecessarily, and be simple and not using figurative language, but using simpler language henceforth. Right? Is this okay? Is this okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, very well. Right, moving ahead, we also have then in any kind of research paper that you would write, this idea of tables, right? And particularly in psychology, we have tables and we have figures. So say for instance, how would you then format a table? You label a table with Arabic numeral, provide a brief but clear title. The title and the label and the title appear on separate lines above the table, much like this, and you cite a source in the note below the table if this is something that you have retrieved from something, right? So this is how this would look. Another example of something that you're more familiar with, say I want to understand, I am reporting the means and standard deviations for response rates in a course delivery by evaluation year. So if you can see, there is the headings that are done, student evaluation was, and how were they done. There's a note describing the table, and there is the mean, the standard deviation, the mean, and the standard deviation that is reported. As you would note that this table does not have outside boundaries. Uh, in the APA format, they talk about how they want to minimize the number of lines that are presented. So there are usually no vertical lines, there are only horizontal lines to divide the rows wherever necessary. Right, so this is a format. If you're using, say, a Microsoft Word and so on, if you were to go to a typeset of APA, this is the default format that it will give you. But it's a good idea to know that this is how it should look like. Right. Similarly, if you're making a figure, you are again presenting the figure and the title of the figure, and then there is an additional title that you may give, and you can cite also a note below the figure. So say for instance, this is a figure of a scatter plot depicting correlation between response rate and evaluation ratings. So there is an access title for both and then there is a note that these ratings were made during 2014 academic term, and this is how the figure looks like. Right, so this is how, so figure, the title in italics, and then we go ahead. Right, similarly, say for instance, I want to make a sample figure. I'm giving you an example of a conceptual model. So I want to talk about the integrated child and youth behavioral health system. And so this is how this would look. Clarity in terms of the words. There is a figure number, there's an integrate, then there's a title, and there is a note about how did this come about. There is a mention. Similarly, if it's a qualitative research design and I'm giving a framework, so say for instance, this is organizational framework for racial microaggressions at workplace. I mention clearly this is how the figure would look like, right? Nothing fancy, very simple, straightforward, ensuring that there is readability, there is a clear title, there is a figure number and a clear title such that there is no confusion. If this is something that you have taken from somewhere, cite your source. If this is something that you're proposing, then you don't need to cite the source. So this is the framework that I am proposing as a researcher. Hence, you would say that there is no note below. But for this particular, because this is something that has been taken from my reading, there is a note that is mentioned below, right? So this is how figures and tables look like. Then come the reference pages, right? So this is one major chunk that we will do. If you have any questions, we can take a moment and take those questions. Otherwise, we'll go ahead on referencing. All right then. Right. So moving ahead, when you're talking about a reference page, then you there's a title at the center, references, you double space the reference entries. The first line is left and the other lines are indented, and you have to order these entries alphabetically by the surname of the first author in each work. This is how, say, this reads like. So this is the surname, and Rosenthal, half a minute, predicting teacher evaluations from thin slices of nonverbal behavior. This is the title of the paper. This is the journal that they have published in, which is given in italics, and then there is a DOI number, there is a page number, and so on. Right, so this is how references look like. Very basically speaking, when you're looking at references,
अरे यार तुम लोग
okay. Capitalize all major words in the journal title, italicize the titles of longer works such as books and journals. Do not italicize, underline, or put quotes around the titles of shorter works such as journal articles. Invert the author names. So my name would be Kumar, S, first name followed by the initials. Capitalize only the first letter of the first word of a title in a subtitle, and do not capitalize the first letter of the second word in an hyphenated compound. So this, the perfectly formatted paper, how this workshop series saved my essay, or if you can see this, the relationship, knowledge, and attitude, fast food on obesity with teenagers. You are italicizing the journal, and rest everything remains like that. Right. So it is a complex system of citation, but I'll give you some strategies that will make your life slightly simpler. Right. So you, when you're compiling the reference list, the strategy, identify the type of source. That's your first thing to do. What am I referring to? Am I referring to a book? Is this a book chapter? Is it a journal article? Is it a web page which is not scholarly, or is it a scholar's web page? Find the sample citation for this type of a source. Mirror the sample, in the sense, try and follow through. If it's a journal article, this is how it should be written. Try and mirror the sample. Make sure that the entries are then listed in alphabetical order and subsequent lines are indented. Also, it's a good strategy, a pro tip that I'm giving you, a shortcut because I've been a researcher, is that most electronic databases have a citation feature like ProQuest, and you can save and import the reference list citation entries. Just make sure that you choose the APA format while you're doing a literature search. You can always delete it if you're not going to use that paper from your paper, that research reference entry from your paper, if you don't end up citing it. It's a good idea to save it nonetheless. Right. So then comes this idea about an in-text citation. Right. So an in-text citation is basically that I am saying that this particular, in my paper, this is now in the main body of my paper, I am citing the reference. So I say that the APA research suggests that the APA publication manual is a good resource for students. I am not saying this, a researcher is saying this. This is not something that I claim to say. So I will have to mention the citation for it, which means I mention here Atkins 2018, right? Similarly, there could be a narrative citation, which means that I say Atkins 2018 suggests that the APA publication manual is a good resource for students. It would vary, right? Sometimes you could write it like that, and sometimes you could write it as a choice. So this is also a researcher's call. For some things that you need to focus or stress on, it might be a good idea to use a narrative citation, but you could also use a parenthetical citation. If it has page numbers, great, life is simpler. You mention the page number in the sense that Atkins 2018, page number 12, right? And if it's you're mentioning it in narrative style, it will come towards the end, right? So moving ahead, you could, in terms of if you're using a quotation, which means you're not paraphrasing, but you are quoting something directly from a paper, it is then a good idea to mention the page number and put the what you are not paraphrasing in quotes. But there is a limitation to the number of words that we don't paraphrase, and that is something that we'll come to in a bit. Right. Similarly, if you're summarizing, say for instance, in one study that consisted of 467 young adults, it was found social media use may not directly affect mental health. It depends on how young adults use social media. I just give a parenthetical citation. Parenthetical here means the brackets, parenthesis, brackets, right? And say for instance, a narrative citation would then put the year in brackets and so on, right? Similarly, you can use signal words. So if you're introducing a quotation with signal phrases, according to Reynolds, or Reynolds argued that, and you give the quotation, you can acknowledge, contend, maintain, respond, reported, argued, concluded. These are the words that we usually use. The past tense, because this was something that was done earlier, you are reporting it. So remember to use the past tense here, right? So it is also possible that the parenthetical citation could include two or more works. So say for instance, if I'm looking at self-esteem, I want to quote Cooper Smith, I want to quote Rosenberg, I want to quote Professor Girishwar Mishra, I want to quote Marcus and Kitayama, I want to quote everyone, so many people. So I could again in the parenthesis include the name of the second name of the author with the year, then a semicolon, and then the next author. Right. So this is how we'd go about. So these are some examples. Say for if it has 3 authors, how would you go about it? If it has 2 authors, you mention both the authors. When it becomes 3 authors, the other person becomes et al. So Lin et al. 2019 examined, and so on. The first instance of a work where there are 3 or more authors, the first instance, please mention the entire group. Later on, you can mention et al. Right. So if it's an unknown author, which is also possibilities, you then put it in quotes. If it's a book or a report, you italicize the same. Right. So you can similarly cite a group author. All of this is available in the APA format, in the APA publication manual. I just thought I'll mention some of these which are important. It's also a challenge when we are citing authors with the same last names. So say, for instance, there are 2 kinds of people, Davis. So you mention the first name, so B Davis and by Davis. Right, so we'll move ahead. So let's do this, a journal article. How do we then write the reference section? So that was the incitation. Ma'am, could you tell me how much time would you give me? I'll pace it up accordingly.
And we have more than half an hour.
All right, yeah, half an hour would do.
Yeah.
Maybe then we can take up some questions towards the end. Right, so say for instance, I want to, yes, please.
Ma'am, I wanted to ask that in references, if there are 3 or more authors, so do we write the name of all the authors in references, or we just write et al. In references as well?
No, in the references you mention everyone. In the first instance in the paper, when you're mentioning it, you mention the last names of the 3 authors. So say for instance, I write Kumar, Mishra and Bhatia, say for instance, those are my authors. I mention the last names there. In the reference section, however, I'll give the complete reference of the article, where then it will read like this. So author A and A, and author B and B, and comma author C and C. Right? So there you give the entire reference. But in the citation, the second instance that citation comes, you can do et al. Right? So you invert the name. So the last name comes first. You follow it with a comma, leave the space, retain the order of the author's names. Then there is a dot. If you can see, there is a parenthesis where you're putting the year. Then there is, just a second. Right. And then you have the title of the article. It's you capitalize proper nouns. You don't italicize it, and you end it with a period. You put the name of the periodical, the journal, and so on. This is in italics. There is a volume, which is again in italicized. It is italicized, but the issue number is not. Then you give the page numbers, and then you give the DOI, which is the digital object identifier link. Some articles which are published in the last decade or so, most of them will have a DOI, but very old articles would not have it, which is fine. That there is no problem. You can still cite them. But if there is one, please mention the same. Right? Again, if it's a book, on the other hand, you're again mentioning here the title of the book gets italicized, but the book, if the book has a volume number, that does not get italicized. So if I'm say writing the the publication manual, which has the 7th edition, that does not get italicized. You mention the publisher. With the book comes the publisher. You can mention the DOI or the URL, whatever is available. Right? And the year is the copyright year, is something that you need to recall. Then comes a chapter in a book. This is slightly more convoluted. The journal and the book were slightly easier. You have the copyright year, you have the title of the book chapter, and then you have the editor's names of the edited book. The title of the book here becomes italicized. I'll give you some examples so that you know this better. But this is the one which is slightly tricky, where you're mentioning two kinds of authors and you're mentioning the title of the book chapter as well as the title of the book. But whenever you're mentioning a book, don't forget to mention the publisher, and that is something that is important. Right, so let's look at some of these examples. So this is a journal article. You have mentioned the last names and then inverted the name. This is the year. Note that it is in a parenthesis, it's in a bracket, followed by a period. There is experimental evidence for the effects of job demands and job control on physical activity after work. The journal is italicized, and this is an advanced online publication, which means it does not have a volume number and a page number too, unlike this paper, which has a page number and there is a DOI that exists, right? So this is how you can, these are some of the variations that you'd see as you go along. There is, how would you say, mention a print magazine article, an online newspaper article, how do you mention a blog post, a book, an edited book chapter. So let's look at an edited book. A book is easier. You have, say, for instance, Schwartz and Swinzy, the title of the book, the volume of the book is not italicized, and the publisher's name comes in. There comes edited book chapter. So say, for instance, this is the chapter name, and these are the authors these are the editors. This is the book title, which is why it is in why be writing anything italics? To distinguish between whether it is a journal name or the author name or so on. That is why this format does exist. And then these are the publishers, and that becomes the same. Similarly, you could cite a film, a report, a TV episode, an online dictionary. You could cite Instagram, Twitter, a web page, anything, given that this is the generation that is on the internet always. All of these are the sources that you are more likely to refer to. The APA also tells you how to refer those. A TED talk on YouTube that you just liked, you know how to refer to that. Just be clear that this is, so follow through, look at the sample reference, and then mirror the one that you need to go ahead with. Right.
Ma'am, just a
yes.
question.
Hanji.
Ma'am, while we are referring to all the social medias aforementioned, ma'am, how are we checking the reliability?
See, checking the reliability, not as much, but if it's
the source, not if reliability.
The authenticity of the source. See, you could be arguing for the authenticity of the source and say that, say, this particular news reporting on a particular thing was problematic. Yet you will have to refer to that news report, right? Which you read. That, say, I saw on Twitter that there are people who are talking about, say, spreading false information about the Russia-Ukraine war. And I want to write a paper on it. I will still have to quote that person, right? In terms of checking for the authenticity of it, that's the exercise that you do as a researcher. That's what you're writing on, maybe. Right? So, irrespective of whether it is an authentic source, desirably, ethically speaking, it should be an authentic source. You do check for it. The onus of that would lie on you, whether you've checked for the authenticity of it or not. But I can only teach you right now. That's a debate for another day, but I can only teach you right now. How would you quote that problematic information that exists? Right? Is this okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Let's do this exercise. Given that we have some time, let's do an activity. So you have to read the following sentence, summarize. I've taught you a little bit about how to be concise, and then write an APA style reference list using the information provided. And you have to give me the in-text citation that would correspond to your reference list entry. Right, that's the published sentence. You have to summarize this for me. One. Second, you have to give me the right reference. It's a journal article. As I've mentioned, you have the authors. I hope everyone can see my screen clearly. Let's do this. Summarize in your own words, in one sentence or so, and give me the reference. How would the reference look like? If you have any doubts with the task, let me know. With the published sentence, there's of course no right or wrong answer. You're only learning how to do it, so it's okay. But with the reference, of course, there's a right answer. So let me know whenever you're ready to discuss it. Anybody who wants to take a go at the published sentence, summarize the sentence. Should we do a countdown? Maybe another minute. The
Just try to
sentence is
speak.
from,
Yes, just try to speak, anyone better. If anybody has done anything.
the sentence, this paragraph is from this article, Implicit Theories About Willpower by Bodnek and Kramer. Try. What are they trying to study? What are the key ideas that they're trying to study? Can you summarize this in a paragraph, in a sentence or so? Maybe 2 sentences instead of the.
Ma'am, it is
Yes,
talking about the correlation between the increase in the demand of job or study with respect to exercising on a daily basis.
So you would say the author's name followed by the year, I think. Will that be okay if you had to cite?
I think, or if we end it in bracket format, parentheses in
Yes,
the
sir,
end of mentioning, right?
Yes, you can. So, okay, Ananya. All right, how would you reference it? Can you tell me the reference, Ananya?
Ma'am, referencing would be done by the name Bernecker, comma K.
Yes, very
at
good.
all. In the bracket.
And in the reference it is Bernecker, comma K
Yes,
dot.
Yes, ma'am. Sorry,
Kramer
ma'am.
and J dot.
Right.
Yeah.
Then in the bracket mentioning about the year, comma, the topic.
2020. Full period, full stop, the topic, yeah, the journal, then
journal, and then mentioning about the page, a certain page we are referring to.
Yes, please. And the DOI.
Ma'am, volume 9 in bracket 2 followed by comma, page 216 to 231, and then we would end it by putting the full stop followed by writing the DOI, which is the link that you have mentioned.
All right, that is Gauri. Was that you?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you do you want to give it a try to write the published sentence? How would you summarize that?
Ma'am, I was actually writing it, but I thought the referencing was the easier part, so I wrote it down first. But I'm trying to
Okay.
write the sentence.
Okay. The referencing is, of course, the easier part. Yeah. Swapna, are you saying something? I guess not. Okay, so I'll go ahead because then I will not have time to cover. So the paraphrase sentence that I am suggesting could be as simple as that Bornak and Kammerer found that when students believed that they had limited amount of willpower, they were less likely to exercise during the stressful time of final exams than the students who believed a non-limited amount of willpower. So I've summarized it into one sentence and I have reported. So if you can see, this is the in-text citation. I have used a narrative citation. As somebody mentioned, we could also put it as a parenthetical citation. The reference list, of course, would be something like this: Bernecker, Kalm, and K, and Kramer and J, implicit theories about willpower, with the title of the paper, the journal in italics, the volume number in italics, the issue as somebody mentioned in the brackets, page number, and the DOI. Right? So maybe let's try doing another one. Maybe this is slightly easier than that one. This is one sentence. You just have to read one sentence and summarize it. This is from the Novak and Zak paper in 2020. Maybe summarize this way. Chotu sa sentence. Make it more chotu, basically. How do you make it? How do you summarize it? And tell me how would the reference read?
Ma'am?
Yes, please.
Okay, so the published sentence can be, in my opinion, can be paraphrased as that leaders need to be emotionally and socially competent in order to work productively in any organization. That was the shortest form I could do.
Okay.
And
yes.
Yeah, and
how would the reference read, Riddhi?
Yeah, okay. So Novak K and wala sign which we use in chats.
Percent, yes, yes.
And Zach P.
Yes, Zach comma P dot, yes.
And after that we'll be mentioning the article title. No. The year. The year, yes. The year. And after that comma, the article title.
Yes.
Then there would be the journal information, which would be there in italics. The volume also will be there in italics.
In italics, yeah.
Yeah, the page number and the issue which is mentioned will be there, will be there normally, no italics.
Not correct? In italics, yeah.
Yeah, and then
you mentioned the DOI. Very nice, Riddhi. Good. Anyone else who wants to try the published sentence? We've got the reference right. Anyone who wants to try the published sentence? Okay. I will give you mine. So employees experience negative outcomes when their leaders lack emotional and social skills. That's how I've mentioned it. And I've given a parenthetical in-text citation this time as Novak and Zach 2020. Right? So this is the sentence. Why is it important to paraphrase is also something that I'll come to in a minute. We can't be plagiarizing, right? If I copy the exact same thing, it's an act in plagiarism, which is an offense ethically, as well as now it's an offense that UGC recognizes. So that's not something we are doing. That's why we are able to do the same. There is an error in this slide. Can somebody tell me what is the error? Can you tell me where is the error in this slide?
You did not put the comma after 2020.
I didn't put the comma after 2020. 2020 के बाद comma नहीं आएगा.
Ma'am, the journal is not italicized.
Very good. Yes, finally.
Also, the
Yes.
volume is not italicized.
Italicized. The things are not italicized. Yes, the journal and the volume is not italicized. Good that you've been able to identify that. I think we've learned something then for today. Okay. Are you up to spot the errors? Maybe we can do a couple before ma'am scolds me. Uh, if somebody can pick up anyone and let's do spot the errors.
Ma'am, in the first one, the names are written as it is without following the format.
Very
Like
good.
the surname followed by a comma, dot, and the ampersand. It's not written that way.
Yes, that's one error in the journal article.
Nowhere in any of the references it's not italicized.
Okay, right. So that some things need to be italicized. Yes. What else?
Ma'am, will the caps be counted? Ma'am, like the second one is all caps. Is it a problem?
Yes, it is a problem. There is nothing in all caps. We are now not shouting at people in APA.
Right, right. So
Also, you have
nothing as the second
mentioned
one.
the full name in the second one. You have mentioned the full name of
Yes,
the author.
yes. All right.
Ma'am, in first one there is a volume and issues mentioned. We don't have to write volume and issues.
You are not audible, my dear.
Ma'am, in first one there is written volume and issues, but we don't have to write and mention volume and issues. We just have to write the number.
Yes, very good. Very nice. What else?
Ma'am, in first one there is written PP, but we just have to write P and dash and to 841 to 850.
We don't even have to write P. We just have to put a comma and write the page number.
Ma'am, in the
What else?
first one, the year is also mentioned. The place of the year is mentioned wrong.
Yes, that's right. Where should it be?
Ma'am, right after the name of the authors in a bracket.
Yes, very good. Okay. What else? Any other which seems correct but maybe wrong? How about the authored book? And somebody tell me what is that the right reference? Does it seem fine?
Ma'am, in this, the name of the author is not mentioned in a format, and here the publication year is also not mentioned, and the given title book is not mentioned in italics form.
Yeah, right. Okay. All right then. Does somebody want to go go at the edited book chapter?
Ma'am, these brackets, I think it should be like circle valley brackets. Edited.
अच्छा, ठीक है. Okay, वहां पे ईयर भी गलत है. Edited book chapter में ईयर
Yes,
गलत
ma'am.
जगह
Year
mention.
also, yeah.
Right. So I'll show you the correct one, and you can see. सबसे जो सबने किसी ने point out नहीं किया, second line indented नहीं थी किसी में भी. That was another rule that I had talked about. That in the reference, the second line is indented. So that's how these would look like.
Ma'am, if I may ask, how many indentations? Like we mark that in the word, no? So it's just
Yeah,
0.5.
this is
from the
0.5.
line?
Yeah, this is
0.5.
0.5. Yeah, this
Okay.
is a 0.5 indent. Right. This is how good referencing looks like. Correct referencing looks like, not good. Correct referencing looks like. Of course, you could try these out at your own pace. I can, if you are up to it, I have a list of wrong referencing. You could do that, share it back with me, and I can tell you if you've got them right. That can be an exercise we could do later if time permits, if you guys are up to it, that is. Okay, so then we come to what I was talking about, plagiarism. There are two common types of plagiarism. One is you're using an improper use of someone's words. The second is use of someone's ideas, and both involve using someone else's words or ideas without properly or appropriately acknowledging the author or the source. How do you avoid word plagiarism? So there is word plagiarism, there is idea plagiarism. You paraphrase the other author's works in your own words. Whenever you're reading an idea or a study, it can be difficult. Of course, I'm not saying that it is easy to paraphrase. This is something that you learn as you go ahead. But much like, if you remember from school, notes banate the class में, teacher कुछ बोल रही है, आप notes बना रहे हैं. Similarly, when you're reading an article, try and scribble your notes. The moment you do that, you will be less likely to plagiarize. Of course, you still cite someone because you refer to their work and that give you an idea. But paraphrase, when take notes of that source, don't write authors verbatim without putting them in quotation marks. Always put the location on your source. Attribute every idea, fact, or finding when you write it. Right? There is a dual advantage of doing that. One, of course, you're not plagiarizing then and you're giving people adequate credit, but also you're increasing the validity of your work. The moment that you cite a good author, the moment that you cite some published work, you are bringing credibility to your own work, right? We sometimes think that if I mention this without the author, the teacher might be impressed that, wow, kitna acha idea tha iska. But aisa nahi hota. You're actually compromising both on the integrity and the ethics of the practice, as well as you're compromising on the quality of your paper. Always cite, there's no harm in citing, right? Of course, cite correctly, and that was what I think the workshop was about. Cite correctly. The other thing that you need to avoid is avoid idea plagiarism, right? So if you are saying something, mention signal phrases. So I believe that this is how it should be. But if you are sourcing someone's idea, so you want to mention that a particular research has argued, mention then, put an in-text citation to credit or give credit to that idea. And most important, you always search the literature to find a source for any ideas, facts, or findings that you put in your paper, right? So anytime when you feel lazy and you don't want to cite, remember that you could be a published researcher and somebody may do the same laziness with you, and then you would not be cited. So remember that each time that you fall that array kaun cite karega, kaun reference likhega, think about that and then go about it. Right. There is, okay. If I have time, I'd love to show this. Just give me a second. If I can open it, I'll show it to you. Would my screen change is something I don't know. Okay. I'm not sure. I don't want to do that. Okay. Right. I'll share the link with you on the chat. This is an interesting Turnitin's where they're talking about the plagiarism spectrum, the kind of things that we do when we are plagiarizing. We could exactly copy the same and put the author in and so on. Right. I think it's opening now. Is it opening for you guys also? No, it's not opening for you. It's only opening for me. Just give me 1 second. Right. All right then. So that's about it from my end. If I'm open for questions and comments. I hurried it up in the end, I think. Yeah.
I would like to ask a question about if we have done any research, are we given any time period to write a report? If by mistake or chance we have not written a report, can we write after some period of time?
Can you repeat the last bit?
Can we write the report of the research after a certain interval of time?
Say you've done a dissertation and you want to publish it later. Is that what you're asking me?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, there is of course a certain time frame that you should do it in, because that's the time frame that it is relevant. We of course in psychology talk about cohort effects, the fact that every generation is slightly different from we're experiencing different things. You and I are different, living in the same world, but we're different, experiencing different things. So there is a certain, there's no fixed prescribed timeline, but it is recommended that you do publish in the, say, the next 2 years or so maximum. That would be like my upper limit would be 2 years. I think somebody put something on the chat. References are included in the word limit. Sakshima, this would depend on the journal. Some journals don't include it, some do. So it would vary from journal to journal.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yes, please.
Ma'am, we have to write a research proposal for this for assignment of this workshop. So, ma'am, a lot of us have doubts that does a research proposal include references, and what all should come under research proposal?
A research proposal should ideally include references. Yes, of course, it should. As I mentioned, there is the APA 7th edition talks about an entire section on how student research proposals should be written in the format. So you should, in terms of a research proposal, a good idea would be to start out with the introduction when you're starting, mention what is your main point or main thesis argument that you're presenting, articulate your goals, propose a methodology that you would want to say use to study that, and give towards the end some understanding about how would you analyze your work. And of course you haven't done it, you have to propose it much like a research synopsis, but you give some tentative idea about how would you analyze, how would these results look like, and what. But each time that you're writing a research proposal, it's a very good idea to think about why are you doing this study, and how will this say add value to literature. So that entire section about introduction is easy, you can do the entire thing. You can do a literature review, you can say that मैं अच्छा literature में ये हुआ है, मैं ये करने वाली हूँ, ठीक है, literature में यहाँ gaps हैं, वो आप mention करो. But towards the end, talk about what are the implications of your study. Why is it that why should say somebody spend time and energy in say mentoring this or funding this or so on, right? So each time whenever you're thinking about a research study, it's a good idea to think about as if you're pitching a sales, you're doing a sales pitch, right? ये study इसलिए करनी चाहिए क्योंकि ये sales, ये इसका outcome ये होगा, right? What would be the value additions that will happen in literature? Then your research proposal substantially stands out. Okay, somebody's asking process of publishing a research proposal. Generally, research proposals at the stage of a PG student would not be published. If you were asking how dissertation is published, when you say published, Akanksha, what do you mean here? You mean how do you go about writing it, or how do you go about converting it into a research paper?
Yes, ma'am, the second one.
How do you go about
to convert it into a research?
Oh,
Ma'am, first
that's
of
a lot.
all,
Yes.
yeah, first of all, I don't have, basic idea of what is dissertation. And
Okay.
so, yeah.
All right. A dissertation is can be understood as something that you're doing as your independent research work, usually under guidance of a mentor. You plan the study in a manner that you could, usually a time bound manner. So usually in masters, there's an year-long dissertation that you have a chance at doing. You are then planning out what is it that you want to study based on the literature review, planning out what would be your goals, what would be the right way for you to study. Is it a quantitative study that you would be interested in? Is it a qualitative study, or is it a mixed method study? Both these choices would depend upon both what are the goals or your objectives, and would also depend upon your comfort as a researcher. Some people find numbers extremely daunting, but that's not a good reason enough to do a qualitative research, because qualitative research has its own rigor. That is one bit. So once you have, say, So usually dissertations, each university or each department in the university has its own uh, word limit to a dissertation, etc. In say in my university, in the Department of Psychology, our word limit for an undergraduate dissertation is 50 pages. That's what we expect our students to submit. But we do expect them to run a full-fledged study, provide the introduction, the method, the discussion, the results and the discussion, much like the format that we've followed today. That's what we expect. Some universities may vary, so that I think the best person to guide you on word limit, etc., would be your mentor. Uh, the second aspect, of course, is that, say, for instance, there's a student of mine who's written this 50-page dissertation. I have, if I have to guide her to write a 6,000 word paper, from that, that's the real challenge. One, to get back to your research and make it into a publishable form. I think all of us as researchers keep struggling with that task. But yes, there comes in this idea that what are the areas that you need to focus on, how do you best present your work, and that's where say the APA manual particularly comes very handy, because it tells you that, okay, all of this is good, but the rest of it is something that you can sideline and you can summarize, and where do you make it concise and so on. In-text citation allows me to, so I don't need to mention that this particular researcher studied 500 people in this university in this world and so on. I just need to focus on the findings of that work, and that kind of summarization, that kind of paraphrasing allows me to then convert this into a more publishable, acceptable format. That's a challenge. I'm not saying it's an easy task. It's a challenge, but it's doable. All of us do it. We learn it, we do it, and I'm sure you guys can also do the same. I think somebody else also had a. Yes, you do write, Anjali, the design of the study in the proposal. After you've mentioned what are the research objectives and research questions that you want to address, in the method section, usually the first heading that comes in is a research design. Sakshima, yes, a research proposal includes literature reviews. That's something that I think I mentioned earlier. Right. If yes, somebody wanted to say something.
Ma'am, having done a dissertation, how to go about publishing it, like going through the UGC CARE journals, etc. How do you go about that? Like, I'm asking it personally, like for myself.
How do you go about doing this? How do you go about
publishing it, basically, like having done it?
Okay. How do you go about publishing a journal? So first step would be then to bring yourself to write that manuscript and summarizing your dissertation into 6,000 to 8,000 words. That would be your first step. The second would be to make a wise choice in terms of journals that are available and that publish work like the one that you've done. The third would be to check the authenticity of that journal. Don't publish in a predatory journal. That's a no-no. And then comes the aspect that the journal may have its own certain standards that you need to adhere to. Some of them may require you to share data. Some may require you to get consent, mention, etc. They have their own format, but you have to submit in an APA 7th edition format, the format, and that's about. It's a slow process. I'm not saying it can be done overnight, but I'm also not saying that you should lose hope in that process.
Yes, ma'am.
Right.
So this word limit is universal, then you are saying, for publishing, like the 6,000 to 8,000 words?
In most places, this can I know your name? Akanksha? No.
Ma'am, Mitisha.
Okay, sorry, Mitisha. Right, Mitisha, in most journals, 6,000 is the desirable word limit. There are also journals which accept only 4,500. Like an international journal may expect you to summarize, particularly if you've done some kind of a clinical intervention, something you may be expected to summarize it to 4,500. So, so anything between 4,000 to 8,000. Some qualitative journals allow for an 8,000 limit, but it would vary from place to place.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Yeah.
Ma'am,
Okay.
I also,
Yes.
if we have time.
Yes, please.
Ma'am, so as we were discussing how to go about the publication of our papers in the journal, so how do we like find the journals which are applicable or which are somewhat applicable in the field of psychology? Like, is like as Mitisha mentioned, like is there a list of UGC care journals or Scopius?
There is a list of UGC care journals which is available on the UGC care website. That's one place to go at. You can also visit Scopus journals, Scopus the platform of Scopus, and you could also look at this web this source, Web of Science, which gives you a fair idea about the journals that can be published. So UGC has its own list. UGC has actually two lists. One is this list of journals that they've mentioned, and the second list is all the journals that it accepts because they are peer reviewed and meet the criteria. All those journals are your Scopus indexed and Web of Science indexed journals. But that's another workshop in its making, I think.
Right, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Right. If I can take 2 minutes, I want to go over a paper just to give them an idea of whatever we've discussed. Is that okay?
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yes, please.
Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, I just wanted to know that the format of a systematic review will be the same as a literature review.
No, the format of a system in some ways it's same because the broader APA format is the same, but the way that you write a literature review is different from how you write a systematic review. I can share with Rita ma'am paper on how to write a systematic review, and maybe she can
That
share
would
it.
be great.
I'll share with you, Richa ma'am, a paper on that. You can share it with the student. Can you tell me your name, my dear? Then it'll reach to you.
Bhavya Shiva.
Okay, Bhavya.
Thank you.
Okay. So can I just take 3 minutes? 3 minutes I'll take. Okay. Right. So this is a paper which is a mixed method paper, and I just wanted to illustrate whatever we've done. Is my screen decently visible to everyone? Is this better now? Yeah.
Yes, yes.
So this is, of course, as the title, I mentioned that there will be a title to the paper. There is an author. You can see the numbers, etc., of their affiliation. There are author notes and what is the individual, what are the notes, acknowledgements, where does the correspondence go? All of this comes here. Then you have the abstract. So you can see that they have a running head. I am a change agent. There's an abstract, which is broadly, I think, 230 words. There are keywords. And then you have the paper that starts. You start with the title of the paper. I'm a change agent, mixed method analyses. And you can note that this is a parenthetical citation. This is in-text. This is a narrative citation. And they've quoted. You can see that they've mentioned the page number here, as I had mentioned previously. They've mentioned various authors. If it's a parenthetical citation and there are multiple authors who are arguing for the same, you mention them like that. Then you move ahead. So here we usually mention them alphabetically. So this is so Henderson comes before Jiminson, Ritchie, and so on. It's not year-wise; it's alphabetical, and that's something that you can remember. Then they have mentioned the research questions that they are trying to address. And then they are talking about role of universe. This is all the introduction that they're talking about. And the introduction and the literature review are interwoven. Then the method where you're mentioning the design. Somebody had asked me, how do you mention the design? This is how you go about mentioning the design. This is a quantitative and a qualitative study. Quant emphasis, qual followed. What is the context of the study? They've also mentioned this is approved by the Institutional Review Board or the Ethics Committee in their university. The participants, they mention in greater detail what is the course structure that they're studying. This is how the table finally looks like. This is what we looked at, one of the tables. So table 1, characteristics. Again, there's a note if required. And then we go ahead. We could look at the measures. So that was a table on the participants. Then there are measures. What are they using? So they've used a online assessment